Alright, this is again kind of an intro for part 2 of the rear end. I'm sorry for the bad camera work. This is the reason why I do not usually do any videos from underneath the vehicle. I had no idea that the camera was not going to pick up anything on the inside where the spider gears are and the C-clips and stuff like that. And like I said, I said this in the video too, this really isn't a how-to. If you recall, when we started this project, it was kind of a bolt for bolt, the best I could do to show you some of the stuff I had to do to get this vehicle back in operational form to be a daily driver again, because the way it was not that way. So understand, I'm sorry, it's not a how-to. It's basically just showing kind of me how I tore it apart, and I know you can't see the C-clips and stuff like that. There's a lot of other videos out there on how to rebuild these. There's actually a guy who did an 03 Tahoe. I actually watched him a few years ago on something else I was working on. So he kind of a little bit more in depth and kind of showing how to do it. He actually does a lot of videos. If he still even does it, I haven't watched him for over a year. I can't remember his name. It's been that long ago, but he actually did a lot of work to this Tahoe to keep it running. So I think he did transfer case. He did rear end. I don't remember what all he did. But anyway, sorry guys for the crappy camera work. And I will be doing another rear end. I don't know what the date and time is. I will attempt to put the camera in such a location that you're going to be able to see, everything I do, and I'll try to do better. All right, we're at the point now where this is going to start coming apart, and here's some of the important things to know about getting started with this. Now, this is not a how-to necessarily, because I am not an expert on this. I have helped do this. I have taken one apart and put new bearings in it and put it back together, but I have never actually done a complete swap on my own, like putting a whole new carrier in and all that stuff. I've changed spider gears, I've changed the pin several times in the bolt, I've changed bearings, but like I said, I've never done a complete start to finish on this. So I sprayed everything down with brake cleaner trying to get a start on the cleanup, and you can tell those bearings are bad. I mean, this rear end was definitely on its way out, like permanently. And one thing I have noticed, and I won't know until I get it completely apart, is that the spider gears don't look near as bad as I thought they were going to. The last couple of these I took apart, the spider gears were also wore smooth out. But I've already got a different carrier in here, so it doesn't make any difference. Now, if this was a GovLock, which is GM's version of a limited slip differential, or whatever you want to call it, when you take this apart, you don't want to pull the pin, this little bolt, which I doubt I've got the right size of wrench for right now, and in fact I know I don't, and then pull this pin, which is loose, and that's not supposed to be that way. When you pull that out, you don't want to spin this after that, because that could end up causing you all kinds of trouble. Misalignment of the bearing, or it's the spider gears. A lot of stuff will go bad. This is open. This isn't near as critical. If you get it off and it falls all apart, the spider gears all fall out, you can put it back in. They're not super hard to line back up again, but you may have to do it a couple trial and error, like keep your finger on the one side. I'll show you how the pin goes all the way through and holds both the small spider gears together. But what you do to get this pin out so that you can get the C-clips out, and I'll show you that. This is the reason. I'm going to show you why you have to I gotta go get a different wrench. Knew I'd forget something. Let's see here. Yeah, it's 8mm, I think. Yeah. All right. Now, holding this, turning it, loosening that up, is not going to be super easy. I can already tell that. And being as I have the oil bucket down here below, I have no doubt that I'm going to make one of these is going to end up down in that hole.
said, I'm not really sure how I'm going to hold this. I should have done this before I pulled the drive shaft out. I may have to set the drive shaft back in there since it's still there. I don't want to break a tooth. Ah, there it went. Ow! That still hurts. This bolt holds that pin in place. I'll show you here what I'm talking about. If I haven't already knocked you clear out of the way on the tripod. I always kind of looked at it like this. I really almost can't make this any worse than it already is, as bad as these bearings are. Alright, once you of course it's Loctited. You see, it's only threaded in here, but this actually holds that pin. Now before I pull that pin out, I want to rotate this down like that. And what that'll do is that'll allow this pin to come out of there, and everything is still lined up. I have not turned or moved anything. And this thing, this is the pin that holds the spider gauge. You can see where they run here and here. And it doesn't feel super bad. I do feel a little bit of a groove on it. So that must mean the inside of those spiders are probably wore some. But anyway, they're getting replaced anyway, so it doesn't really make any difference. At this point, I could turn all this, and it really doesn't make any difference. But what I'm trying to do is show you how to do it if it has that gov lock in it, which a lot of them do. If you're trying to reuse it for whatever reason, you're just replacing pinion bearings and the outer bearings or whatever, you're trying to reuse this. You don't want to start spinning stuff now because everything goes bad really fast. So, let's see here. Now that that pin is out of the way, that allows you to be able to push the axles in. And what that is, there's C-clips on both ends of these. And by pushing those in, you're going to be able to allow that C-clip to come out. Once the C-clip comes out, you actually have to pull the axles out. So you think the axles, you know, they're like here and just here about the middle of this ring. So there's no way you get this carrier out with the axle still in place. So you basically have to slide the axles in, reach in there. Sometimes you have to get out and be abusive with it a little bit. But don't get carried away, because usually they'll slide in. See, I just spun that a little bit and it's moved them spider gears some. That's what you got to be real careful of not to do. It's also better most of the time to have some type of a magnet. You can grab those C-clips. I got too much stuff in the way, I can't push on it. I'm going to give it a tap with the end of my the handle of my hammer. No, it is not cooperating. What else is new? I can spin it around, but it's not letting it come out. Usually it does. I might be able to find out where that's. Let me try the other side. What I'm going to do is find where it's open, stick my screwdriver in there, and pull the axle in. See if that don't release it. Yeah, I'm actually spinning this, getting rid of the what I told you not to do. Yeah, they're still lined up there, but no, it's not wanting to cooperate. Can't get it on that side. Well, that'd be a little harder or something. Noise alert. That's too noisy. Well, let me see if I can get with this. Always got to have some tool that you just didn't bring out with you. Well, I don't know why this isn't cooperating. Generally, these come right out. And I just threw my tool. Well, I'm not going to keep playing with this. This is an open rear end. I'm just going to go ahead and pull the spider gears out. No reason you can't in this case. I was hoping I wouldn't have to, but it's kind of making it to where I'm going to have to. So the little spider gears are out. And that's going to allow these to come together a lot easier. I've not really had to do that before. Alright, let's try something different then. Let me pry on the gear, pull the axle in that way, and then push the gear back in, and it fell right off. Maybe that's the way to do it. That's what that C-clip looks like though. I don't know if I can do it to this side or not. Yeah. And now that one's out there. Okay. Now what that's done now is, like I said, it's completely allowed you to pull the axles out of the way. Good grief. You know, out of everything that's fought me, I have never had those fight me before. Usually that stuff just falls right off. Huh. I don't know why that's being that way. Well, it's because I'm trying to show you something. Wow, I have never had the axles not come out of there. And it's not even on the... Huh. Well... Wow. I have never had that happen. Usually what happens is when I'm trying to put the C-clips back in, the axle keeps falling out. Basically used my breakover bar between the bolt and the back of the axle shaft, not where it was hurting anything. Alright. Like I said, out of everything I thought was going to fight me, that was the last thing I figured would. And these are your inner spiders. They actually are splined. So that's what your axle rides on. That's what makes everything move. You know, there's one, of course, on both sides. So that part is now apart. The only thing now holding this carrier in are the four, the four caps, I guess you want to call them. And you have to mark these. You have to know what side they go on. You have to have the orientation right. So I marked them with, I use actually a hammer and a punch. And I have a number set, and I could have done it that way, but I just grabbed a punch. I put one mark on the outside for number 1, and it's up high, so it's top. and then I put a mark on both sides of the right side facing up, which means that's top. So this is 1, this is 2, both of them are up high, which means that's top. And these are 16 millimeter. Bearing cap out of the way, or retainer, whatever you want to call it. I'm actually putting left on left, right on right. That way there's no question. Now, I know the compressor's on, but when I pull this out, there is likely shims or spacers on both sides of these bearings. The races is what that was actually holding on with the bearing races. And so when you pull this out, everything is going to try to separate at once. What you're trying to do, it's a good idea to completely clean up down here on the floor, on the ground, so that whatever you lose tries to stay on the side it's supposed to be on. But otherwise, you want to remember what side those are on, how many there were, the whole 9 yards, and the orientation they were in. So when I pull this out, I'm going to try to grab both sides of all this. You'll see what I'm talking about here in just a minute. The one on the passenger side is not coming with it, of course. The bearing race don't bother me because that's going to go away, but what does bother me is any of the shims or spacers. Okay, here's the spacer for the driver's side, and this is the spacer for the passenger side. If I measure them, they're different, and what they do is they actually go on that side. And then your bearing race, which of course fell off like I told you it would, then goes on both sides of that. This is the spacing for the basically how much backlash I believe you have, because moving this pinion over is how much contact and where it actually is, left to right. So that's what these are for. So just looking at this, I didn't bring a snot rag with me, but she's really chewed up on the inside, and I bet the bearings are done. They're not as bad as this. Like I said, I guarantee the pinion's going to be worse. Well, I'm going to move this one over here, and I'm going to set this one over here on this side with the cap. That way, you're not losing them, knocking them out. So. Now I got to get there in front with my impact and get the pinion out, and I'll show you these bearings and stuff once I get everything out and cleaned up. So I'll bring you back here when I'm starting to do that. No, I forgot to bring you back. Kind of how it works sometimes. Went in and got 1.25 inch socket. Took the pinion nut loose. I don't know if you can see me or not on this side, but basically I took the yoke off, nut, and there's a washer behind it. And now you gotta get the seal out to get the rest of get the bearing out. And I'm gonna have to move this. So I could probably get the pinion out of there without doing this, but I'll try to get this seal out. Seal's not doing any good anyway. Just use a seal remover. Now I push the pinion in. You may or may not have got to see that. What I'm trying to do is get this bearing out, outer bearing, which actually doesn't look too awful bad. Allows me to get the bearing out, or the pinion bearing. Here's a crush sleeve. It's important to have that. And then, like I said, here's your pinion. And it looks, yeah, it's pretty bad. the races are probably what's going to look worse. Like I said, I ran into this before with one I did for somebody else, and recently it was actually an '07 LTZ Tahoe, and it sounded just like this. And I brought it up, took it apart. This is almost a spitting image, except that the spider gears wore a whole lot more than these are. What I am going to do is clean this up. I know you're not seeing anything right now. A little brake cleaner so I can take this. I'm going to try to put this in my hand without my gloves on. Try and get the oil out of it. Wow. Don't even go back on there. Let's don't force it. Let's see. I know. Take my gloves off. Oh, there was a hole in one of them. Try to get you off of them. Okay. All right. Let me get a snot rag here real quick that I should have grabbed to begin with, and a light. The first thing I'm going to do is show you. This is the bearing, passenger side. That's the race. You can see it's got a bunch of marks in it. Actually, you can actually see the outer edge there is chewed up. And then here's the bearings. And yes, it won't wipe off. That's how bad they are. You see, they are chewed. With that said, here's the inner pinion bearing, and you can see it's not a whole lot better, and I mean chewed. Now here's the outer, and it's not quite as bad. This would be the one that hooks closest to the drive shaft. So when you look at this, back up a little bit where you can kind of see. So when it's actually in, that's kind of what I mean. This actually goes down to here. You can actually see where it was riding. Your crush sleeve sits right here. So crush sleeve I took off. Goes right there. And then this goes on the inside of that all the way down here. But I'm not going to force it on because I don't need the bearings, but I need the pinion. So these are pressed on, by the way. And on that carrier, those are pressed on. I don't need to take those off, but I do need the ring. I'll do that here after a bit. Now here's something. I seen this on that, also on that Tahoe LTZ. This is basically like I'm not gonna call it a bearing, but it kind of is on the small, one of the small spider gears, and I mean used clear up. It's split, it's cracked. It's got a bunch of heat cracks in there. So this thing has obviously been run empty on oil, and that's exactly what happened to that 2007 LTZ or 8 or whatever year that was. It was actually ran. I assume that the seal went bad, and they just continued to drive it. And that's the. I'm sure you can see that. Oh yeah, that's the inner or the inside race there. And you can see it's not only, it's like it was only running on half of it, and that was because of how loose it was. Now, you could have possibly tightened that pinion nut up because it was loose, but see, that crush sleeve is set up, everything is set up for a certain depth. By tightening that up, that actually then changes your, where your pinion rides on that ring. So, yeah, you could have possibly kind of postpone the inevitable, but it wasn't going to fix the problem by tightening that nut up, because it was loose. Not loose like in it was falling off loose. It was like there was enough slop in the bearings, you know, that you were able. I could have tightened it up more, is what I'm saying. But anyway, that's, you know, it's done. So this is typical, and what I'm going to do is I have to beat both the races out, because there's a race on this side. Then of course there's a race for the front bearing. And you can kind of see this. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. I'll put my finger in front of it. That slot right there, there's one on both sides. And what you do is that's where you put your punch. And you can punch those in and out. You know, that's how you punch that race out. And then you go to the other side, and you can punch the one that you see closest to make back in this direction. And they all go together the same way. You know, just do the reverse. Now, you really need a bearing installer tool, or whatever you want to call it, to actually put those in. And you know, I'm going to recommend that you do that. But anyway, that's actually not what those are for. I think those are for oiling purposes, to keep the oil moving around in all the bearings. But that makes a really easy area to get a hold of and push those, you know, the old races out. So anyway, that's what everything looks like. And so if you have a really loud rear end in one of these, or a bunch of clunk and stuff like that, the clunk is usually caused by the gap, and some of that spider gear, you know, wore out, and some of its bearing wear out. But in this case, there was no clunk in the differential. It was a tremendous, I mean, a growl from 20 miles an hour to 50 mile an hour. You almost couldn't talk to the person next to you. It was that bad. So she was, you know, she was on her way out, and that's the way these things are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to beat those races out. I'm going to clean this whole thing up, and then I'm going to put a snot rag at the end of that, where the pinion goes in, and I'm going to put the cover, clean the cover, leave the old gasket on. I'm going to set it back on this, cover this up, because what I have to do now is I'm going to clean up the new, well, I'll tell you what, I'll bring you back here in a minute, and I'll show you the new stuff first, and then I'll explain what I'm going to do to it.